we go. Okay. All right. So as I was saying, Vayeshev means to live somewhere permanently, to settle in. Vayagar, the word ger, which is also stranger, which is also used for convert, means somebody who is temporarily living somewhere. So it opens up by saying that Jacob is no longer seeking to be a stranger anywhere. He's seeking to be settled. And the rabbis looking at this and knowing the unfortunate story that, Jacob is never settled. He has nothing but tsuris. Tsuris is from the Hebrew tsa'ar in Yiddish. It means troubles. And if you look at his life, it's full of tsuris. It's full of troubles. And so as soon as he tries to settle down and be comfortable, the story of Joseph and his brothers comes to the forefront. So maybe perhaps it's just a fatalistic vision the rabbis have of life. It says that for tzaddikim, for righteous people, they can never really be settled. They're always going to have problems. So there's no promise just because you're righteous that you're going to be rewarded in everything you want in this world. So we're introduced to the story of Joseph, the biblical story, not the Broadway musical version of it. Actually, I've never seen it. I'm sure some of you have seen it. But it opens with Joseph having dreams. And in the biblical world, indeed, in the rabbinic world later on, dreams were understood to be next to prophecy. They weren't prophetic. There were always things the rabbi said in a dream that might be mistaken, but nonetheless, they saw the dreams had meaning. So Joseph has two dreams, and in both of those dreams, it shows him being more powerful and riding herd over his brothers, as it were. The first one is a dream in which they were binding sheaves of grain, and all of the grains that the brothers had put together bowed down to Joseph's. A little bit later, another dream, and this time it's the sun and moon and the 11 stars, bowing down to Joseph. Very clear indication of Joseph being in charge. Even his father and mother are assumed in this vision, to be subservient, are bowing down to Joseph. So this helps arouse up even more jealousy in his brothers, because their father Jacob had shown favoritism to him, and giving him, of course, the very famous psychedelical multicolored garment that he had. Okay. Why? Jacob makes the same mistake, in a sense, that we find repeated, that he chose to favor one child over another. In this case, because his favorite wife was Rachel, he favored his firstborn child through Rachel as being the most important. And that goes all the way through the story. Even at the end of his life, he gives Joseph a double portion, a double heritage, which was, the understanding was that went to the firstborn son. And so all the way through his lifetime, he does that. We'll come, interestingly enough, when it comes time to bless Joseph's sons, he decides to bless the younger rather than the older, because he, of course, himself was the younger than the older one. So he kind of switches. And indeed, the story says that Joseph, we'll see in a few weeks, Joseph sets up his sons in front of his father, so that his father's right hand will go to the oldest, and his left hand will go to the younger. So what does Jacob do? He does it this way, crosses his arms to bless the younger instead of the older. And the biblical critics can see all kinds of imagery here. We're just going to leave it at that. So one day he goes out. His brothers said, let's see what we can do to him. They capture him. They throw him into a pit. Either they sell or some strangers coming by take him out of the well and sell. It's a little bit hazy. Ends up in Egypt. And then we have a break in the story of Joseph, and we have an episode in the story of Judah. And Judah, of course, is the fourth born of Jacob's sons. But later on in history is the tribe of Judah, which gives rise to King David. And it's the tribe of Judah and Benjamin, or perhaps Judah and Simon, it's a little hairy, unclear, who survived to some extent after the destruction of the first temple. And that's why Jews are called Yehudim, which comes from Judah, Judahites. Okay? So Judah is married, he has some children, and his wife dies. And he goes out to take care of his sheep. Well, I'm sorry, skip back there. He has three sons, Onan, and the last is Zimri, Shelah, excuse me. So he has three sons. The oldest heir commits a sin, marries a woman by the name of Tamar. And he did something, the Torah is not very clear. It says that he did something displeasing to the Lord, and God kills him. So Judah says to Onan that he should marry his brother's widow. The Torah prescribes that if a woman dies if a woman's husband dies and they've not had any children, her brother, one of her brothers-in-law, is supposed to marry her. That was, at least in theory, what we call levirate marriage. And it was frowned upon to a large extent by the rabbis later on. And today it is not practiced for the most part, even though movies occasionally claim it is. But so Onan marries Tamar, and once again, he does something wrong. What he does is, instead, when he has sexual relations with his wife, with Tamar, he prematurely removes himself so that he doesn't give seed into her womb. Forget what they call that in fancy English terminology. But what we have later on is onanism comes from the fact that he cast his seed upon the ground, on the soil. Hence another word for masturbation. Comes from Onan, the second son of Judah. So now Judah's married two sons to this woman Tamar. He's not so sure. Maybe it's her fault. I don't know. It's what's going on. And so he sends her back to his father's house. Then Judah said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, "Stay as a widow in your father's house until my son Shelah grows up." For he thought he too might die like his brothers. So Tamar goes home, and she sees as if the time has passed. Judah's wife has died, and she hasn't been married off to the third son. So what it says in the Torah is, a long time afterwards, Shua's daughter, the wife of Judah, died. When his period of mourning was over, Judah went up to Timnah to his sheep shearers together with his friend Hira the Adulamite. And Tamar is told about this, that her father-in-law has gone up there. And she says, so she takes off her widow's garb, covered her face with a veil, and wrapping herself up, sat down at the entrance to Enaim, or the crossroads to Enaim, which is on the road to Timnah. For she saw that Shelah was grown up, yet she had not been given to him as a wife. When Judah saw her, he took her for a harlot, for she had covered her face. Interestingly enough, her face is covered. That makes her a prostitute. And so he goes in there and he says, let's fool around. And she says, what are you going to pay me? And so he didn't have any money on him. And it was before they took Visa. He says, I will send a kid from my flock. You thought that was funny. Okay, I'll send a kid from my flock. She says, okay, it's not a bad pay, but I need proof. I got to know that you're going to do it. So leave. She says, leave a pledge until you have sent it. He said, what pledge shall I give you? She said, your seal and cord and the staff you carry. So the marker, the cord, the seal in the cord is how they sign names, right? You put it into wet clay and then dry it, and that was the seal, or wax later on. And it was on a cord around his neck and his staff. So they get together, and after he goes away, she packs up her bags and leaves. He sends his friend back to find her to give the kid to her, and she's not there. And he asks, where is this prostitute gone, this harlot gone? And nobody knows what he's talking about. So Judah says, all right, what can I do? I sent and did the best I could. So then later on, Judah hears that Tamar is pregnant. Now, I'm going through all this because it's an interesting story and it figures in later on as well. And it's got some elements in it important to remember. The idea that a woman has to, if she's widowed, she has to marry one of her brothers-in-law, presumably the oldest, going down. And that's carried out in the Bible. That's listed as a legal reality. The rabbis also, this Bible also says there's a way out of it. And later on, the rabbis themselves preferred the way out of it because they weren't comfortable really with this whole thing. But clearly from the story that we're reading about right now, she has the status of being a married woman. Right? A woman, Yavama is what they call in Hebrew, is waiting for Yibum, has the status of being almost completely married to somebody in the family, at least to one of her brothers, until the actual transaction takes place. So so if she has sexual relations, she's guilty of adultery, which was not looked on very nicely in those days. And so when Judah is informed of this, he says, take her out to be burned. And that's itself is a question, how they get burning about it. Because that's 3 months later, Judah's told all about this. 3 months, a woman normally shows that she's pregnant. And so he, being the head of the family, of his part of the family anyway, says, let her be burned. And she was being brought out. She sent this message to her father-in-law. I am with child by the man to whom these belong. And she added, examine these. Whose seal and cord and staff are these? And Judah, of course, recognized that's his. She was careful not to say it's Judah. She doesn't want to embarrass him, even at the cost of her life. And Judah, when he sees that what she'd done was okay. Not the best way of going around doing it, but it was all right. It's understood that what she did was ultimately proper. There's sort of this kind of proper. But so what it says, and Judah recognized him. He says, she is more in the right than I am, as much as I did not give her to my son Shalach, and he was not intimate with her again. Okay, so one time she got pregnant. She's got children coming on. When it comes time for her to give birth, there were twins in her womb. Jacob's a twin. Jacob was a twin. Judah was not, but runs in the family apparently. While she was in labor, one of them put out his hand, and the midwife tied a crimson thread on that hand to signify this one came out first. But just when he withdrew his hand back, and out came his brother. So you made a breach for yourself. And so they named him Perez, or Peretz. And the second one came out, and he was known as Zerach. Now, Peretz eventually, as we will see in the book of Ruth, is an ancestor to Elimelech. I'm sorry. Not Elimelech. I'm running a blank here. I'll get it back in a few minutes. But he becomes an ancestor of King David, because Ruth the Moabite marries a man and she has a child, and the praises that are given to her are that she should have children just like Tamar did. So it's interesting, there's a kind of a shadow story about Tamar. how she gets pregnant, but she gives birth, and these are considered to be good children. They serve as ancestors that lead up to the story of David's family, King David, who's descended from a Moabite convert to Judaism. So it's interesting that there's something going on here in the Bible in general, saying that people sometimes look at things and see it one way, and there may be something more that God has in mind in the future. Be careful about judging people, because you don't know what's going to be in the future. Exactly. Later on, when comes time in Moses, when he first goes out to the field to see his brothers and sisters laboring as slaves in Egypt, it says he sees an Egyptian beating a Jewish man, and he looks back and forth and he doesn't see anyone, and then he slays him. What does it mean he doesn't see anyone? Well, the simple shot, the straightforward meaning is that nobody's around. He's in the clear. But the rabbi said, no, he looked around to see who's going to come as a descendant of this Egyptian. He didn't see anybody who's worthwhile, so therefore, if he killed him, he wasn't removing something good from the world, ultimately. So you never know what's going to come. Okay, so we have this story of Judah thrown in there as a little sidebar. But again, also, there's something, again, more that's going on here, I think. Because later on, when the kingdom is divided between the northern tribes and the southern tribes, Judah, is the southern tribe, the kingdom of Judah, and Ephraim, who is the second son of Joseph, who takes the role of being the chief of that part of the world. So there is always a kind of conflict going between Judah and Joseph. And so this story is an interruption of Joseph's story. Maybe the Torah's way of kind of already introducing us to that conflict, because earlier it wasn't just Judah, it was all the brothers, except for his brother Benjamin, who were upset with Joseph. And they were upset rightly, but what they did, of course, was very wrong. And they fooled their father because they said Joseph was dead, and they took his coat and they killed a goat and used its blood, sent it to their father, letting him have this issue, thinking that his son was killed. And Kathy, you're right. This play on the older, the younger son, it runs all the way through the Bible. Throughout the Bible, we have this conflict, and it's a interesting vision that even though we may say something's supposed to be one way and we make laws, the eldest son is supposed to inherit the double portion, whatever it may be. The oldest child in today's world becomes the next king or queen of the country. It used to be just the boys, but now either. The eldest has this special status, and yet we see it. Life doesn't always go in the directions we think it should be going. So we get back to Joseph. So Joseph is sold as a slave in Egypt, and he works in the house of Potiphar, and everything he does works well because God likes him, and he finds favor with in Potiphar's household, and so things go well. And of course, now we have the soap opera. Soap opera being that Joseph is given control of everything except for Potiphar's wife. As it says, he left all that he had in Joseph's hands, and with him there, he paid attention to nothing save the food that he ate. Right? Now, Joseph was well built and handsome. Yafet Toar v'yafeh mar'eh. Good-looking guy, good-looking kid. He's 17 years of age or so. After a time, his master's wife cast her eyes upon Joseph and said, "Lie with me." But he refused. Right? It's the older lady, Mrs. Roberts. Mrs. Roberts. I saw that when it first came out, so I'll tell you how old I am. Okay. So, and I was old enough to, Robinson. Anyway, enough of that. So, and of course, not unusual for ancient world, it's the woman who's the threat. Eve was the problem with Adam, and here's Potiphar's wife. That's in line with a certain way of seeing the world as we find in the Bible as well. But she wants Joseph, the younger guy, the good-looking guy. He refuses her. And he says, look, with me here, my master gives no thought to anything in this house, and all that he owns he has placed in my hands. He wields no more authority in his house than I, and he has withheld nothing from me except yourself, since you are his wife. How then can I do this most wicked thing and sin before God? All right, so he refuses it. But now we, in the way of the Torah, so she keeps after him. And a couple of verses later, one day he came into the house to do his work. None of the household being there inside. Now, the punctuation, the Hebrew punctuation is, you would read, one day he came to the house to do his work, none of the household were there, period. That's really the Hebrew punctuation. Then it says, she caught hold of him by his garment and said, lie with me. Remember I said, even punctuation can be an active interpretation. So in the translation of the Tanakh that we have here, makes it that she grabs hold of him only because nobody was there. Right? She took it upon herself because nobody was there. The rabbis of old looked at it a little differently. And he says he went into the house to do his work because nobody was there. What does that mean, because nobody was there? He was about to give in. He was giving in to his worst nature. And there, because nobody else was around, he could do it. So in either case, she caught hold of him by his garment and said, lie with me. But whatever reason, he left his garment in her hand and got away and fled outside. So he says, no, you have thought better of it, whatever it may be. The Midrash says he saw an image of his father Jacob and he was ashamed of what he was about to do. So he runs away, leaves his garment in her hand. And so she, of course, claims that she was the injured party. He tried to seduce me, tried to rape me. Look what you bring this Hebrew into our house and look what he tries to do to me. And so he gets thrown into prison as a result, which he deserved to a certain extent. And then while he's there, two of Pharaoh's servants, his cupbearer and his baker, are thrown into prison. They have dreams. Joseph interprets their dreams that the butler, the cupbearer, will be returned to his position, the baker will be killed, and lo and behold, it happens exactly that way. But Joseph says to the butler, the cupbearer, before, when he tells him about the dream, when you go back, remember me. And of course he doesn't. And so the parsha ends with Joseph still languishing in prison and the butler having returned to his home, to his position, and the baker being executed. And again, the rabbi's playing on this. Says Joseph didn't rely on God. He relied on the butler, the cupbearer, to remember him. And therefore he had to stay in prison a few more years. So that's this week's portion. Stay tuned for next week. All righty. We are going to continue now with our Hebrew. We left off. Let's go back to the letter Lamed. We were up to the letter Lamed, right? We didn't do Lamed, did we? That's what I thought. Going through my notes and everything, it looks like we did. So the Lamed, in case you haven't discovered, right? The name of the letter is almost the sound of the letter. The Lamed is an L. Okay, and so it is treated exactly the way the letter L would be treated, and it's connected with a vowel that's associated there. So we go down to line number 1. Everybody's together now. So please open up your microphones so I can hear you mumbling with me. All right. So we'll start with line 1. The first one is Le. Then comes La. La,
L,
L, Lu,
Lu,
and E.
E.
Okay.
Le.
Le. Next line we have Tal, Tal, Tul, Lucha, 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 right. Then we have Lul
Ul.
and Labat, to the daughter. Line 3. Talul, Talu,
Talu, yeah.
just Talu, Talu.
Talu.
Babul,
Babul.
Liraba,
Raba.
Arbel,
Apple.
and El.
El.
El. 2. Okay. Line number 4. Lechet. Remember, because of those double vowels, the two segals, the accent shifts from the last syllable to the next last syllable. In this case, there are only 2 syllables. Okay. So it's lechet.
Lechet.
Berel,
Berel.
Turat,
Turat.
Baruchu.
Baruchu.
Baruchu. Okay. Line number 5. Halechet,
Lechet.
halacha, halacha was that one, and this one is halach, halach, halacha, and the last one is lelechet, lelechet. Okay, go down to 6. Bulach, Behar,
Behar.
Tar, Boot. Tar,
Boot.
Baruch.
Baruch.
Okay, Ta, right?
Ta.
Ta, Lech,
Balech.
Balechet,
Lechet.
Telchu,
Telchu.
Bilachat,
Belachat.
Lealtar, Lealtar. Altar. Okay,
L'altar.
okay. Now, we're going to be introduced to this letter here in vowel. Right now, we're treating it as a vowel. When you see this, the bottom, the end of the tail, the bottom is on the same line as the rest of the, like up here on Holam. Okay, it doesn't go below the line. Or to the left of the letter, a dot above it, like an Eloheinu. Okay, those are both O. O. And once again, this technically is a short vowel, and this is actually technically a long vowel, but they sound the same. All right. We'll So it's O. So we'll go down to line 1. Line 1, number 1 is
Bo.
bow,
O.
Oh.
bow,
Toe.
toe,
Toe.
toe,
Ho.
toe,
O.
ooh,
Ooh.
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 All right, we're going to line number 2. We have
Bo.
bow,
O.
O,
O.
Lo.
Low.
O, right? Then
O.
toe,
O.
toe,
Bo.
Low.
low,
Low.
Blue.
and
Blue.
blue. Right? If it's in the middle, it's like somebody punched you in the middle. You go, ooh.
Oh.
All right? Ooh, that's right. Ooh. On top is, oh, you hit me. In the middle, you're going to hold. That's too hard. Okay. Line number 3. Oh, roll.
Roll.
Roll around.
Roll.
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 Tor.
Or.
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 Bow.
Bow.
Oh. Root.
What is root?
Root.
Ruth. That's Ruth in the Bible. Ruth. Okay. Line number 4. We have or.
Or.
In the beginning, God created or, light. Or.
Row.
That's or, right?
The core.
Or.
Or.
Core means the firstborn, as a matter of fact.
Oh, my language means a bad child.
Borat.
Ra.
Borat.
What?
I don't think that's what he meant for the name of the movie, but anyway. By the way, you know, when he's speaking, supposedly, what is it? Where is he from?
It's supposed to be Kazakh, apparently.
Yeah.
But it's
Kazakhstan.
He
Hebrew.
uses Hebrew. He
Yeah.
uses Hebrew when he's supposed to be speaking. Again, a
Kazakhstan.
movie I haven't seen. Maybe one of these days.
Mhm.
Okay, line number 5.
Torah.
Oh yeah, Torah was the last word, right? Line 5 is Torot. We'll come to this later on, but Torah is singular, one Torah, and Torot is the plural, feminine, Taurus. All right, what's this word? Oro,
Wrote.
World.
Yubal,
Bal.
Ubal.
Yuval.
Bubot,
U-
Boat.
Elul,
Elul.
the month of Elul. All right, line 6. Look at it carefully.
Yore.
You're a boat.
You're a boat.
I said technically because
Your
right,
your boat.
your boat. The first syllable is your, because that O is a short vowel,
Your.
and so that makes it the 2 dots are not going to be pronounced in that scenario. So it's your boat. Go float your boat. Oops.
Torah.
O
Or.
ra oat.
Torah.
Oat.
Torah. Hot.
Yal
Yal.
Yaltut
Toot. Toot.
or lot
Lot.
or lot.
Ella.
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 Line 7. Bechorot. Bechorot.
Bechorot.
And
Bechorot.
Bechorot. Lot.
Boat.
Bull.
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 That's a lot of bull. And roe.
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 Roe. Roe.
Line number 8. Aroch.
Aruch.
Aroch.
Arucha.
Arucha.
Aroch. Erbul. Erbul. And Berech. Remember the
Berech.
accents on the first one?
Yeah.
Berech.
Berech.
Okay, let's go to the next page. Berech. The ch at the front of your throat.
Berech.
All right, now the letter Yud, well, we had it in the name of God, which we didn't pronounce. Right? Now we're going to come to it as the vowel. We're working with it as a vowel. So the A vowel, the long form, is like this. 2 dots underneath the previous letter, followed by the Yud. That's A. Or just 2 dots under the word letter without the Yud. That's the short form. That's the long form. Right? Now, let me explain one thing. We're pronouncing it as A, as Aleinu, as it says there. Now, Israelis, except under certain circumstances, will pronounce it as like the Sego, where I'm using what is kind of a modified North American Hebrew pronunciation. Generally speaking, we make a distinction between the A and the All right? So we're going to pronounce it as A. When you go to Israel, you live there, then you'll pronounce it the correct way. All right. Line number 1. We have A,
A.
A,
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 A.
A,
Well, look at where the dots are.
Yay.
Yay. Okay, so it's being used as the letter Y here. So it'd be yay. Because the dots are underneath it, not in front of it. All right, it's a little tricky there. Line number 2, we have Ray,
Ray.
Ray, Hey, hey, everybody. Hey, and Bay. Okay. Line number 3.
So, Rabbi,
What?
looking at the word looking at the word that we write for God, the yud with the double dots underneath, that literally kind of sounds like yeah.
Okay. This is an abbreviation. When we come to the word Adonai, as it's written in the full spelling in the normal Hebrew spelling. I don't know if I can write on here that I'll see it. Is that right? No, let's see. Adonai is spelled Aleph. Well, let me do it. Better be spelled. All right, tell you what, hold on a second.
Rabbi, it's not very important. I was just verifying that I'm not being crazy. That is yeah.
Well, here's the thing.
Abbreviation.
But the abbreviation, but it has nothing to do with the vowels underneath it. The two, so the name of God, the way we say is the personal name of God, Yud, Hey, Vav, Hey. We don't know how for sure it was pronounced. Okay. The substitute word that we use instead of Yud Hey Vav Hey is to pronounce it like the word Adonai, my Lord. Okay? And since if you write a document with the letters Yud Hey Vav Hey, you're not supposed to throw it away. So the tradition became sometimes they would write it with 2 Yuds. Even that became a little questionable. But in order to make how you're going to pronounce it, you see it there. So it says, I'll give you a hint. It's the same. Some of the voweling is the same as from the word Adonai. So that's why you have this vowel here, Shvav followed by Kamatz. But it's not to tell you to pronounce it that way. But when it's written Yud Hey Vav Hey, you know, right? Yeah, that Yud's a little long there. You might think it's, you might associate this vowel there and Yahava or Yahawah is why people might think it's supposed to be pronounced that way. Hence, in German, Jehovah. And thus became the Jehovah business, right? So, yeah, you're right, and but we don't do that. Okay, we're up to line 4.
Yeah.
No, line 3.
3, I think.
Okay, line number 3. The first sound there is Tate,
Tate.
Tate,
Tate.
8,
Tate.
Tate.
Beto,
Beto.
Beto.
Leilot,
Le-
Leilot,
Leilot.
and Lecha,
Lech.
Lecha.
Lecha.
Line number 4, we have Leah.
Leah.
Who's
Leah.
Leah?
Leah.
Who's Leah?
Princess name?
Someone's
One of the wives.
Which one?
Oh, that I don't remember.
I don't
And it was
remember.
one of them.
Out of sight, out of mind. She was the one that Jacob was tricked into marrying first. The older sister is Leah, Rachel is the younger sister. See again,
That's right.
Leah, older, younger, as we noted before. Okay, second one, Borer,
Rare.
Borer,
so rare.
Yoel,
Yoel.
which in English becomes Joel,
Joel.
Yeah.
L.
the prophet Yoel, Joel, and Tehela.
Tehila.
Line 5, Yarbe,
Yarbe.
Rachel,
Rahel.
Halo,
Alo.
Loch.
Pele,
Hele.
and
Lech.
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 Okay, line number 6.
Oh.
Oh, what? Oh, hell.
Oh, hell.
That's the tent. B, oh, hell. In a tent.
Hell.
L, oh, hell.
Lo.
Oh,
Oh,
hell.
Lo.
Oh,
oh,
hellet. Oh, hellet.
hellet. Oh, hellet.
Right. Oh, hell is a tent. B, oh, hell, when you put that bet in front, means in. L, oh, hell means to the tent or to a tent. Oh, hell, it is to use tents to go camping. But in Hebrew, we just add an extra vowel, we add an extra consonant. We can change from the 3 letters to different meanings. I'll have the basic sense, but they work different ways a little bit. Tent, tenting or camping. Line 7, Beita,
Ta.
Baita, Baita, Belo,
Bello.
Orech,
Re.
and
Re.
Areta. Arecha.
Arecha.
Fell there. Let's see. Do we are. No, we'll stop with that. Okay.
Okay.
Stop sharing. Okay. So we got up to almost started the letter Nun, so we didn't do none yet. Nothing yet. All right. So we talked about the first 3 books of the Torah last week. So we're going to talk about the last 2 books of the Torah this week. The book of Numbers, Bamidbar, and the Deuteronomy, which is on Hebrew, Devarim. Okay. Now, Numbers, it starts off, it's called Numbers in English because it begins with a census, a counting of the Jewish people. And though it is introduced by saying in the Midbar was when this takes place. So that's the difference between the Hebrew and the English versions of the names. But we have a couple of very important episodes in Bamidbar. There are a number of different things that takes place there. But what I mentioned for you to look at, chapter 13, is the story of the sending out of the spies. In the we're told that God tells Moses, send men to scout the land of Canaan, which I'm giving to Israelite people. Send one man from each one of the ancestral tribes, each one a chieftain among them. So they prepare to send out spies. At this point, they're expecting to soon, perhaps, go invade the land of Canaan. And so certainly you want to know what you're up against. But according to Deuteronomy later on, this was not really what God was asking for us. In Deuteronomy chapter 1, it says the people wanted to send out the spies. God was really not in favor of that to start with, or it wasn't his idea, hence why it fails, as we'll see in a minute, this spying. So they take one from each tribe, 2 of them. One's Joshua, who eventually takes over from Moshe, and Caleb, who represents the tribe of Judah. All right. So they go and they find the land. They see it's a beautiful land. They bring back samples of the fruit. It was so wonderful that it took 2 men. If you took a big cluster of grapes, took 2 men carrying a pole, and the grapes hanging in the middle in order to carry those back. That's why the Ministry of Tourism in Israel uses that as the symbol for the Ministry of Tourism of Israel. So they saw that, but after going through everything, it says at the end of 40 days, the number 40 repeats itself numerous times. We can't be sure if 40 is meant to be an exact number, maybe. Most of the time, though, and especially the modern critics, assume that 40 is a large number, not huge, but a large number. And so it's used, we say dozens. So it says they took 40 days to spy out the land. And we'll come back to 40 in a couple of minutes. And they say, when they make the report, we came to the land you sent us to. It does indeed flow with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. By the way, the term milk and honey, which is used to describe the land of Israel, milk is milk. The honey, though, is not bees' honey, but date honey, date jam. Davash, when it's used in the Bible, is not always, there's a couple of cases where it's not, but almost always otherwise, it's a reference to date honey that was much more available and popular. Okay. So he says they spy it out. Yeah, it's really great. However, the people who inhabit the country are powerful, and the cities are fortified and very large. Moreover, we saw the Anakites there, Amalekites dwell in the Negev region, Hittites, Jebusites, and Amorites inhabit the hill country, and Canaanites dwell by the sea and along the Jordan. Says, you know what? Yeah, it's great, but these big guys are there, and there's nothing we can do with them. All right. So Caleb speaks up and says, let's go. We can certainly take possession of it. God will take care of us. But they didn't like that, and they kept speaking against it. And they said, we saw these guys who were like Nephilim, the giants, and we looked like grasshoppers to ourselves, and so we must have looked to them. A very interesting psychological phenomenon is being expressed here. How you see yourself may very well be how other people are going to see you. You are often the reflection of how you view yourself. So watch how you see yourself. All right? And there's a midrash that says, how did they know that they looked like grasshoppers to them? Because they said they were hiding in a tree. And when these giants came by, I must have hit the button by accident. It says if a man finds something obnoxious, that's the word, the translation here, ervat davar, some unseemly thing. And there's a discussion what that really means. Jewish law, as we'll talk about it in the spring, basically means that it's anything that creates a problem to husband and wife. He writes her bill of divorce, and she goes out and she gets married again. And he can never remarry her. That's the whole law. But it doesn't explain what the bill of divorce is. It doesn't explain anything what transpires. And so this is an example of something that says you have to have other rules and regulations to understand what it means. Hence the idea that the oral Torah is minimally the necessities to understand this. The example I give is like a driver's license. Everybody here knows what a driver's license is. What does it have to look like? What does it have to contain? What are the rules and regulations of making a driver's license? Who can issue a driver's license? Under what conditions can they? We don't know. It's the laws that are found elsewhere. We know that a driver license is and exists, but if you went 500 years ago, they'd have no idea what you were talking about. And if you go 500 years in the future, they might not again know what we're talking about. But in its context, we know what we're talking about. And so too, with the Torah, things in context. Now, at the end of this parsha of Ki Teitzei, which is what I wanted to touch upon the last thing tonight, is a very powerful, but also very disturbing law of the Torah. You might remember when the Israelites go out of Egypt on their way out, after the count of the sea, they're attacked by the Amalekites who attack the weak and defenseless. And they're told there's going to be a war between God and Amalek, and Israel's commanded to remember what Amalek did. We're supposed to read this passage every year as a memorial. He says, Amalek, but Derek, remember what Amalek did to you on your journey after you left Egypt. How undeterred by fear of God, he surprised you on the march when you were famished and weary, and cut down all the stragglers in your rear. Therefore, when the Lord your God grants you safety from all your enemies around you in the land the Lord your God is giving you as a hereditary portion, you shall blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. Do not forget. Okay? So on the face, it means there's a mitzvah to kill Amalekites. If somebody comes up to me and says, hi, Rabbi, I'm an Amalekite, I'm supposed to kill him. The state might find that very difficult. The rabbis too, I think, had difficulty with it because, this kind of thing. And eventually what happens is the rabbis understood this to be no longer operative. In theory, it did operate one time because they were very treacherous, be that as it may. It no longer operates because when the Assyrians conquered that part of the world, everybody got mixed up. The Amalekites disappeared. There's nobody who can prove he's an Amalekite today. And therefore, the mitzvah has fallen by the wayside. But it does exist here, and you have to be aware that that is something that's found there. And the rabbis understood it and understood a way of understanding it so it doesn't really apply any longer in human history. But we can't ignore what is there. We can attempt to ameliorate it, which is what the rabbis sometimes did on some of these kinds of things. But remember, nobody has a license to kill anybody unless they're coming after you. The one thing that will end with this is the idea that you're allowed to defend yourself. Judaism is not pacifistic. And it says if somebody comes up to you and tries to kill you, you're allowed to kill them to save your life. But if you can subdue them without killing them, you're not allowed to kill them. Some people aren't aware that that's also part of it. Yeah, James Bond had a license to kill, but that was under the British rule. You know, who can go along those Brits, you know? What are we? All right, if you've got a 007 license, then maybe you can get away with it. But otherwise, by the way, that's one that I was just reading. I don't know if it's true or not. There's a book I'm reading right now on war. What's the author's name? She's written about the peace of Versailles, and she wrote the war that ended peace. I'll remember her name later. But she claims that most soldiers in fighting didn't shoot at the enemy. Most people couldn't bring it themselves to do it. Now she uses as evidence that after battles, they sometimes found muskets that had several rounds of ammo put into them, because you put in the ammo, you shoot, you put in a new bit of powder and you put the ball in and you ram it down and you shoot. I don't know if she's accurate there, because someone said that's proof that the guys didn't know what they were doing in the heat of battle. They didn't know if they shot and went off or not. She's claiming it's proof that they didn't want to shoot. So sometimes evidence goes different ways. But anyway, most people, the only way you get men and women today to really become killers is you make them think that the other people are nothing, are no good, are beasts, are vermin. Then maybe you can do it. But thank God most of us have this internal reaction that we don't want to kill another human being. Thank you, Adi. But you're the one who brought up 007, so I don't know if I'll let you get away with that. Okay. All right, everybody. I'll see you. Have a happy Hanukkah. Tomorrow night, we light the first candles. So make sure you do it every night of Hanukkah. If you want to give yourself a gift, give yourself a gift. If you don't give a gift, that's okay too. All right, and spin those dreidels. All righty. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Good night.